Hello there, sword friends. Today I have a fun sword to share with you that was sent to me from sword friend Marco to sell. Now, side note on the sale, I am going to put a link in the description down below to stuff and try to keep updated on the status because it may or may not be for sale when you end up watching this video. It's filmed in June 2019, but it may not be available when you come to watch it because this video is hopefully just going to be interesting in and of itself because the sword is interesting in and of itself, as are many of the fun, cool, sharp, shiny things that I try to show you. The basic gist about this sword in particular is it's an oldie and a goodie, one from Bugei back in the day when they used to make swords or do custom swords. Back in the long way back when, there used to be this catalog that would come out, and one such sword in here was the 1086 custom sword from Bugei. This thing retailed for $4,500 or $4,450 if you want to be specific about it. And back in the day, that was quite a bit of money, but still pretty cool because there was a company that would act as an intermediary between some very talented craftsmen like Howard Clark and Ted Tenold, which I believe are the two craftsmen responsible for this sword, and they would do a great job. But honestly, even if you're working with very talented people, even very competent business people, it still can be very stressful to do these sword projects because you have to get a bare blade, then send it off to get it mounted and find fittings that'll fit and get it polished, and it can take a long time and a lot of different hands to make these sword projects work. So Bugei back in the day was offering these types of services to make customized swords. I've seen some of them on the internet that have come up for sale secondhand. There were some odd options that you were able to get, like your name stamped on the blade or a myriad of this or that. But anyway, there's a bunch of cool stuff that they offered. I'm guessing they don't offer it anymore because it was a giant pain in the ass. I'm only assuming it was because the sword projects I do are often a pain in the ass, and a long one at that. Anyway, $4,500 is quite a deal. I mean, granted, it's expensive. It's nothing to shake a stick at. But nowadays, Howard Clark charges $5,000 for a bare blade that isn't finished. It's a bare blade without polish and needs all of the accoutrement and services, if you will, to get it wrapped up and done into a finished sword. So $4,500 for a finished sword back in the day was quite a deal. Now, this sword in particular has been a bit of a safe queen. I show some signs of age, to be sure. There's some scuffs on the blade, some minor issues to speak of, but realistically it hasn't been used for much of anything, and it's held up pretty well. It also, I don't know, it's just interesting to me that back in the day a company like Bugei would offer custom services like this. Pretty cool, and I haven't really seen an option like that since. If you know of one, throw it in the commentary down below. I'd be interested to see who offers custom services from talented makers like such. There probably is, and maybe just ignorant of it. This sword has some interesting characteristics, namely, first and foremost, underneath this handle right here, the Nakago ends about yay, so you should know that in this 15-inch handle, there's about a hand's worth that's just bare wood. I'll talk about the construction of the Nakago and rather the ska in just a second, but underneath here, there's a bit of an oddity, and that is that the tang, Nakago, is not signed by Howard Clark. Now, I asked Howard if he did the blade, and he was 80% sure that it was him, which are pretty good gambling odds. It shows some signs that are very much Howard Clark and some signs that are not. One, the Yusuri made the file markings are not symptomatic of other blades that Howard has made, nor are the fact that it's not signed, realistically. That's the big one. It doesn't have a signature on it, which is also a bit of an odd one. Now, that said, those are the two things that suggest maybe its authenticity is not Howard Clark. However, the things that are is that, one, it's made out of 1086, two, it's from Bugei back in the day, three, the little holes in the Nakago are also drilled in such a way and then tampered. They have like an edge that's been kind of drilled out ever so slightly, and basically I don't see that on a lot of swords or from a lot of swordsmiths. Not to say it's guaranteed Howard, but I see it often on Howard's blades. So in any respect, there are a lot of things that point to this being a Howard Clark type sword. Also, the hamon and pattern and all that kind of stuff is very reminiscent or suggestive that it's his work. Anyway, the sword itself, apart from being made by Howard and Ted, two good craftsmen, is, well, basically it's an odd duck and kind of interesting looking. The handle is a little over 15 inches long. I'll put dimensions in the description down below, along with a link to the Weapon Dynamics computer. The blade is 31.5 inches without the habaki, which adds almost another inch. And the blade is realistically very close to straight. It's a pretty straight sword. Now, I think Swordman Marco is actually ordering this blade with a larger sori, a deeper sori anyway, and it just didn't work out that way. Now, a straight sword isn't necessarily unhistoric. There are examples that are pretty much straight. There's not a ton of examples that I find with really long ska, but maybe that's just my ignorance. Anyway, this is kind of an odd duck combination. It's a big sword, it's very straight, very long, big handle, big blade. and for me it's fun to use. I'll talk about the use in just a moment, but overall it's kind of an odd shape. Now, it wouldn't be odd to have a deeper sori in a blade like this, even a 1-inch sori, which is beyond what we typically see in mass production swords, or even swords that are made outside of Japan by competent smiths. 1 inch is dissipated pretty quickly along a sword this big, unlike, say, in a 25-inch blade where the 1-inch sori would be much more pronounced. 1-inch sori for a blade this long wouldn't be uncharacteristic. So this having like an 1/8-inch sori makes it look pretty much straight. Anyway, on with the actual sword. I'll tell you about each individual component, and then I'll talk about how it moved around. I haven't cut with this sword, nor do I plan to, because it is for sale, and that would diminish the value. Sword Trend Marco gave me the okay to do it, but given that the next owner is probably going to want a fresh, clean, pretty sword, I think me cutting with it would only devalue it and not serve the purposes we're really going for. But I did swing it around a bit. I'll tell you about that in a second, but first let me tell you about the pieces. So I'll start with the kashra, and the kashra is interesting because, well, I haven't seen these fitting sets before. They're obviously like cast reproduction fittings, but not pieces that I've seen in the past. They're done in a reasonable quality. The casting quality is both good and muddy. Like, it looks like there were antiques of a sword, or antique fittings of sorts, that were recast to take molds of to use, and that those fittings were likely aged or diminished somewhat, because the casting quality overall actually looks pretty good. The lines are clean, there aren't imperfections and inclusions and pits and pockets and things like that. There's not seams or off-sided sloppiness or anything like that, but the overall theme is just dull and subdued somewhat. It took me a little while actually to figure out I was looking at a cat on the kashra, and the fuchi and suba look the same. Menuki are a little different. I'll talk about those in a moment, but the kashra is basically, it's got an angry kitty on it, let's call it that, a tiger in the bamboo. I like the patina on the fuchi kashra and the suba. It has this kind of shiny black piece to it. There are silver looking shirodome here, and overall it looks good. The transitions to the ito are also really nicely done. Nothing grabs my hand, or there's no kind of ledges to catch on anything. Overall, it's a very handsome kashra if you happen to like the theme. If we move on to the ska, I've already talked about the fact that it's very, very long. And the other bit about the length is that there's just a chunk of wood here. I believe the Nakago shows that there's maybe about 2 inches of steel afterwards. So this whole section here is basically just wood. Now, the construction of the ska is a full wrap of samegawa. I initially thought that these were panels because as I was moving around the ito, most sections of it are very tight, and I didn't notice it move while I was swinging it around. But there are a couple strands around the menuki that separate ever so slightly, and underneath I was able to make out this, what looks like a wood panel. So I thought maybe these were paneled, larger, nicer panels of samegawa. There's small nodules on one side and emperor node on the other. The quality is quite good, but when I took the ska off the Nakago, I took it apart and I looked under the fuchi, it looks like there's a full wrap of samegawa and then like a wooden shim between the ito and the side of the samegawa. I don't honestly know why that's there or how historic it is. Many of the swords I have don't have that, but it may just be a higher end thing that I'm unaccustomed to seeing. Anyway, it's there, and it looks like a full wrap of samegawa, which I find important because, provided it actually is what I suspect it to be, this extra hand right here is reinforced by the strength of the samegawa wrapped around it and then bound in ito. So even though it's just a bit of wood down at the bottom, it's still likely pretty structurally strong. Anyway, the sugekor doesn't appear to be cracked in any way. The ito is for the most part tight. The diamonds appear relatively consistent. There's a nice wasted shape and a nice swept shape as well on the ska that gives some additional dimension to the sword that otherwise wouldn't be there. Before I move on, the last bit I want to talk about are the menuki. Now, on the menuki, the ito does move around ever so slightly, but realistically, that's not too bothersome. As I was moving it around, it was not problematic. I didn't notice, even though I held my hands over the menuki. The other bit to note is that the menuki don't appear to be the same type of reproduction. I would venture a guess that these are likely antique menuki, and they are as well angry kittens, or bamboo and cat themed, but the detail on them looks nicer. They appear to be of a better quality, and there's also some wear on them that suggests to me that the Minuki are perhaps antique pieces that have been put on this sword, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Many a sword projector use antique Minuki because the cost of antiques is often relatively inexpensive, at least if you compare it to casting new ones and trying to get a good cast out of them. So antique Minuki can very frequently be used at a very cost-effective manner, and I think it's a good thing. It matches the shape. I'm only guessing they're antiques, but perhaps I'm wrong. Anyway, they're of a better quality, higher detail, and I particularly like the one right here where the angry little kitty face is poking out. Anyway, that's Minuki. We'll move on to the Fuchi. The Fuchi is an angry kitten in bamboo. Again, I can make those details out quite a bit more quickly, though. The crouching angry kitten over here on the Fuchi appears to be much easier to identify than the one on the Kashra. Overall, the patina looks the same. It has the same kind of subtle details but high casting quality. Kind of an odd mix, but overall meshes well and thematically goes together. The Suba, as well, is the same bamboo tiger theme. This Suba is thinner than the average, and I actually tightened it when I had it off a little bit. It still moves ever so slightly, but it's a little tighter than it was when I originally showed it when I was moving it around. I took the bit off and I tightened it with a nail set. I'm guessing it's steel as well because it's quite hard to move around. It did not deform very easily to make adjustments to. It's a thin Suba. Has the same type of detailing on it. Thematically, it goes quite well. All in all, this is a very kind of classic looking piano black, silk Ito black, white Samegawa. It's a very kind of classic looking sword. The Seppa are worth pointing out. I believe they are custom pieces. They're different and they have an interesting dental pattern in them. The Habaki as well looks to be copper. In my mind, this could be cleaned up and maybe patinaed into a rokusho patina of some kind, but I'm leaving it as it is because some people really like the patina look on it. It does have some character, and I don't want to destroy that for the next owner. The downside is the Habaki does not hold in the saya very well, and this is likely just because of age. It's been a safe queen most of its life. It's likely sat there. The sword is heavy, so if it was, propped up against something, it's possible it compressed the wood slightly, and now it doesn't hold. The shim would fix it, but I don't. I'll let the next owner worry about that unless somebody really wants me to try. Shimming it isn't terribly difficult. It's just sometimes it can get over tight, and I make it worse rather than better. Onto the saya itself, the first thing I'll point out is that Koiguchi. One, there's a small crack here, which again is likely from age. It's going to diminish more over time, but at the moment it's not necessarily bad or even much of an eyesore. I like the shape of the kasha. It has kind of sharp edges along the side, which is not something that I found to personally hold up well for a user, but at the same time looks really nice. And it is concave in terms of it's caved in slightly at an angle, which is really nice to see. There's a little bit of dimension and depth and classiness to the Koiguchi area here. The Koiguchi is also horn, as is the Kurigata and Kojiri. They're of a different color, and they mesh in with the lacquer really well. Saya-wise, the lacquer is also done really well. It's just this perfectly smooth piece of, there's basically no ripples or indentations. It's just really well sanded. The finish work on it is really quite good. It's on the bigger side, but this is a bigger sword. And apart from the fact that the saya doesn't hold on the blade super tight, which again is a maintenance issue that can very easily be addressed, it's just really well executed. It's a nice piano black kind of glossy looking saya. And very pretty. It has some scuffs and smudges, but realistically not that much. It's just from the shipping side of things. The Segeo's been tied on, and it's held up pretty well. I don't notice any spots underneath the Segeo that have impeded or scarred the lacquer in any way. Overall, just a very beautiful saya. Now we can talk about the blade, and the blade is just absolutely beautiful. There's a lot of activity in the hamon. It's very bold, easy to see. I've got it here in the right light, and it really stands out. And there's just, basically Howard's artistry really pops out in these hamons in the 1086 steel. His L-stick stuff is beautiful in its own right, and I know there's a lot of people that like it, and I'm not trying to diminish it at all. But what I would say is that the hamon is just very straight, very simple, and it lacks some of the artistry that you see, some of the random patterns that you would see in a different style hamon. And his 1086 steel often has some really interesting looking patterns to it, which are easy to appreciate. There's a little spot right here near the Kisaki, which is one of my favorites. You can see this little pattern here, very active. Anyway, very beautiful sword, lots of activity. Shape-wise, I've mentioned that it's, you know, mostly straight, but it's a reasonably thick blade. It's not terribly wide. It doesn't have a ton of distal taper, but it's certainly there. The Kisaki is pretty simply formed. It doesn't have the wide reinforced Kisaki, and in part that diminishes the Hasuji that is thrown out. With this sword, as I'm using it, I really have to get the angle right and put some gusto behind the swing to hear it kind of make a swishing sound in the air. Could be my bad practicing as well, but I did notice that it was a little trickier to use. Now we can talk about that actually. Let's talk about the swinging it around. So I brought it out and I did some basic kata, a little bit of EI with it, and honestly, I really liked one thing. Now I'm not a smaller guy, I'm a little over 6 feet tall, and in a nutshell, it forces me to move my hip in a way that otherwise I wouldn't. I mention this a lot about bigger swords in that if basically I get to cheat. As a practitioner, I get to not move my hip and just use the length of my arm to draw something out, and it forces me, well, it doesn't force me to do anything. It encourages me, or allows me, I should say, to be lazy as a student. And this one, I don't get to cheat as much. I have to move my hip somewhat, though it could even be longer. And if I wanted to practice, I could just grab it a little further down and force myself to move my hip and whatnot, which I am notoriously bad at. Though moving this around is not bad. The long handle is a little bit odd with some of the one-handed strikes, but it's actually not as unbalanced as you might expect it to be for a big, long sword with a big handle on it. And actually moves relatively easy, and I feel like I have point control. It's certainly not bad. And when I have two hands and I place one down towards the kasha end, I really feel like I have a lot of point control here that I wouldn't expect in a sword, particularly a katana of this length. Anyway, cut-wise, it moves around easy. It doesn't make the swishing Hasuji sound very easily, but it's certainly easy to control, easy to start moving, easy to stop moving, which I didn't expect for a sword this big, and I'll put the link to the Weapon Dynamics computer down as well. The other thing that bears mentioning is that the handle is just easy to grab onto. It's really well shaped and very, very comfortable. I also like the way this sword draws. Now, apart from the habaki not holding on maybe properly, it's very smooth and very quiet in the saya. As I put the sword away, it does have a slight bit of rattle, which isn't necessarily unexpected in a sword this long, though it'd be nice if it were tight and didn't rattle. That said, it's just very quiet. The sword glides effortlessly like it's on rails. The saya is very well made, and as a user experience doing the Ido with it, it's very, very comfortable to use despite its size. It's just, the mount's very well made. It's very comfortable to draw and do noto, to resheath. It's a comfortable experience to work with. I really enjoy moving it around, but she's a big girl. It's a big sword, and it's something to be noted that a big sword naturally doesn't handle like a little one. So while it's controllable for its size, it's still quite a lot to move around, and I'm not a small guy either, so moving a sword around that weighs a little bit more doesn't hamper too much. And I wasn't doing thousands of repetitions with it, just a little bit of practice. I didn't even untie the knot here. I just wanted to show it in motion a little bit. It does have a Hasuji. You just have to be swinging at a particular speed and get your angle right, and then it sings a little bit, but it's not as easy to move around as an Iaito, say, made to whistle really loud. Anyway, overall, I'm particularly impressed. I like this sword. It's a different shape, different size. I'm glad I got a chance to see it, hold it, move it around a little bit, and I hope that the video has been interesting for you. Bugei has made some very interesting swords, and it's cool to think that back in the day, somebody was managing these projects and working with these very talented craftsmen to make projects like this, and that you could go to a company and buy a custom sword and have it all done. I'd imagine that even with the weight, that took a lot of kind of burden off people's shoulders to get these types of projects done, and I'm curious how many of them actually ended up getting made. I've seen a couple on eBay. There's things that go around from the Bugei days, but it's not something that comes up terribly often. Anyway, I have a lot of fun playing with these types of swords. I hope the video's been interesting. That's all I have for you. As always, cheers and thanks for watching.